from Luxx in Sydney. Please get your hands out and bang them together for Tim Clapham.
Woo. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. All yours.
That's it. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming. Can you hear me? Thank you, James and Kim, obviously, for organising this event. It's pretty amazing to be the first person up, a little bit daunting. Thank you to the sponsors as well. And, of course, thank you, everyone here, for coming along. If you don't know, we run a website, Hello Luxx. So Hello Luxx is a training website. We offer loads of free tutorials and paid tutorials as well for industry software, Cinema 4D, of course. Arnold, Octane, V-Ray, After Effects, check it out. But my main bread and butter comes from Luxx. Luxx is our production company. Been a director there for about 8 years. Before that, I was director of Hyper in the UK. So I've got nearly 20 years in this experience. I'm a bit old and jaded. Seen the industry change considerably. Big things happening. Recently just teamed up with Never Sit Still and Baxter Studios, 2 other studios, and we teamed up to create a collective. We've only been a collective for a couple of weeks. Still trying to think of a name. But we moved into this awesome new space in Sydney, as you can see. Beautiful warehouse. We've kind of taken over the mezzanine, but as you can see, there's another mezzanine just up here, so we're loads of room for expansion, so big times ahead for us. So, over the last 20 years, seen the industry change considerably. Less analog, more digital. Of course, software becoming an integral part. Most of you probably use some of these, maybe slightly newer versions. Home computers, obviously a lot more powerful. Now you can sit at home and produce broadcast quality work in your bedroom. And I imagine that most people here are using software, creative software of some kind. Even if you're using an analog process like stop motion, then your work probably still goes through a post-production pipeline. So the computer is really essentially a tool for us these days. It's like a pencil or a paintbrush. It's an integral part. And I really wanted to look at how important and how automated that is and how much we kind of automate our processes these days. So I was going to look at the kind of idea of procedural versus handcrafted processes. So I guess I need to define what I mean by procedural. The automation of design. Why you'll always be in work. It's kind of like a procedural, guess it means a process or a procedure of events that make things happen. We're allowing the machine itself to become part of the creative process, which is quite an interesting concept, really. If you think about type itself, back in the old days when they used to set type with hot metal or with bits of wood carved out, nowadays we just have a predefined character set that we just press buttons and it appears on the keyboard as illuminated pixels. In some respects, it's kind of a procedural process already, very automated. We don't have to actually write each letter. Back in the old days, in the 80s, when I was at school, I first studied graphic design, and we used to use this stuff, Letraset, and I found this awesome advert showing all the cool things you can do with Letraset. We used to do layup with a scalpel and spray mount then. We didn't have any computers really, apart from some old Commodore PETs if you studied computer science. Even when I was at university, we only had 2 Macs in the whole of our course. This is Letraset, and if you don't know what Letraset is, it looks like this, and they're like dry transfer sheets, and you rub them with a pencil, and it transfers each letter onto your paper. So when you set type with Letraset, you really have to be pretty careful about your kerning and your leading. There's no going back. If you do mess it up, then you have to get your scalpel out and scratch it off. So even to a certain extent, this is almost procedural, We're not actually handcrafting each letter. It's done for us to a certain extent. Being a bit absurd, really. I'm almost saying that the pencil itself, if you're using a pencil, then it's procedural, because unless you make that pencil yourself, then it's manufactured. And when I was researching this, I came across this work, which I thought was really nice and poignant and totally irrelevant, but I just put it in there because it was nice. And this artist, Ariane Prin, she's from the Royal College of Art in London, and what she did was she took all the waste products from the college and then repurposed it into pencils, and then they reused the pencils in the college, which I thought was like a really nice concept. But I digress. So rather than saying handcrafted versus procedural, maybe we should be asking ourselves, When do we stop letting the computer make the decisions? So as motion artists, we get the client brief, probably something like this. We interpret that brief, we make our decisions, we build our concept, and then what we're presented basically with a couple of problems, artistic problems and technical problems that we have to solve. And really on a day-to-day basis, that's what we do. Of course, we also have one other major constraint, which is the budget, which is always a big problem because we always want to do more and the clients never want to pay less, want to pay more. So the brief itself, it could be something as simple as, which shapes look nice together? How about these? Or maybe these? Or perhaps, are these colours working together? Or maybe these colours? What about the composition? And maybe, what about timing? Don't you love Keynote? And we have to look at all of these and we have to work out how we're going to do it. Maybe we brainstorm it, if anyone remembers brainstorm. But really, how are we going to make it? So Make It is a conference that Adobe held in Sydney earlier this year at Carriageworks. And this illustration was created by Shavalini Kumar. She was commissioned by Adobe to create this as the logo for the conference. And I was commissioned alongside Mike Tossetto, one of the collective members from Never Sit Still. And we were asked to create the title sequence. It's quite an unusual project because we were given this as a starting point. So really the style was sort of set in stone. And we were like, how are we going to move forward from this? What are we going to do? So this is an early test that we did. Just some stills, really rendered from cinema, and then thrown together into a little GIF. What we wanted to do is we wanted to take that logo to the next level. We wanted to make it 3D, still retain the isometric feel, and illuminate it with global illumination. And by using the actual textures rather than adding any lights or any kind of environment, we just wanted to use the textures from the logo itself. And that was the interesting thing about that is it allowed us to kind of change the color and switch different things on and off. And we get this like really nice change in illumination. And this was one of the very first tests. We ended up building the whole logo like this and animating all the elements. And the concept that we went with was that what we wanted to do was take each of the components from the logo. So we've got the camera, we've got the paint pot, we've got the pencils, the pens, the Wacom, the laptop, and really all of those are like a representation of disciplines within the industry, and we wanted to take those as a metaphor for all of the users for Adobe, the people that use the Creative Cloud. So one camera becomes many. So here's the camera. So we built this manually. It was a very complicated model to make. But we animated it traditionally using keyframe animation. We then used MoGraph to allow us to make multiple copies of the camera. A procedural approach, essentially. It allowed us to create literally hundreds of them, and then by using the effectors, we could animate the time offset parameter, which allows us to offset the actual animation of the camera so that they all animate in sequence. We used the MoGraph color shader, and that allowed us to then use random effectors to essentially randomize the color palette across those cameras, but all within a specific color palette. And that's a little test, an early test that we did of just testing that out. And if we look at the next shot, you can see that we definitely set some keyframes. This is just a section of it, but the interesting thing here is that you can see already that we've got like a manual and procedural processes living and working together. And you can tell that because of that bottom curve, and you can see that there's a key every frame. So that's where we've baked some dynamics. So we have the dynamic simulation working in harmony with our keyframes. So we're already thinking of procedural, handcrafted, kind of coming together. Here's the actual dynamics that we did. And I know all you traditional animators are going, you could have just done that with some keyframes. The interesting thing here is that you notice that I've got a few renders and they're almost all the same, apart from we've just got some changes in the color, and that changes the illumination, which has a really massive, profound effect over the look of the whole piece. And we wanted to use that throughout. So we wanted to take the color and animate this as well as animating all of the objects. And by using this in conjunction with our edit, we would end up with a really nice, dynamic, rich result. problem was we didn't really want to have to actually render every single shot in every color combination. So what we did was we automated that process by using just the take system, which doesn't really do the work for you. It's not animating or anything for you, but it does facilitate a nice smooth workflow. So by setting up these takes, it allowed us to override the texture tags. We could then just switch different elements on and off really quickly just by switching to different takes, and you can see that just by switching between these takes, we then have all of these different color combinations. So as we did the edit, it was very easy rather than manually going through all of those hundreds of texture tags and literally changing the material. So it's a kind of a perfect example of, an almost procedural workflow, but it's really just automating certain things. So the computer's allowing us to do that, which facilitates, it facilitates a much easier creative workflow so that we can kind of concentrate on doing artistic stuff rather than worrying about if we've changed the right texture tag. We use this trick throughout the piece, and for example, one of the laptops, and again, we hand animated this laptop. We used MoGraph to randomize the colors and position them around, and of the random effector here to distribute them in a more of random positions. We used it on this boombox as well, and we created a wall of those, again, using the same kind of technique. And the thing is with this is a procedural approach makes perfect sense. You don't really want to position all of these by hand. Imagine laying them out one by one. If you want to change the density or the number of them, it's a really tedious, ridiculous process. And by doing them by hand as well, it's not actually you're not going to gain anything apart from lose time and budget. There are certain things where the procedural approach absolutely makes perfect sense. And I think this is one of those examples. So here is a little clip, a cut down of some of the animation that we did for that. So I think one thing I should point out is that handcrafted versus procedural isn't about it being a competition, which is better. There's a time and a place for all of them, for each process. MoGraph, is a good balance between procedural, handcrafted. It allows you to kind of create these multiple elements without having to do it in a tedious way. But at the same time, if you think about it, we're actually giving up some of our creative control to the computer, because we don't really position all of those laptops. We just kind of add a random effector until we get the randomization, how we think it looks right. But the computer's making that creative choice for us. The same with the color, the computer is making that choice. So all of a sudden, the computer is part of our creative process. And I love procedural. And I'm going to get this as a t-shirt, I think. But the thing is, sometimes, and I'm so guilty of this, as a motion artist, you want to find the quickest way to do stuff. You don't really want to compromise your aesthetic, but at the same time, you do have a family and you want to get home and see them and you want to keep your client happy. But sometimes, even if you just want to distribute a few objects like this, and we've all done this, I'm sure, if you work in 3D, just want to put some trees across a landscape. And when I was doing this, I was thinking, hold on a minute, why am I doing it with trees? I could do it with beer. So the point is that if you look down in the bottom right, we've got the seed value. And if you click on that seed value, what happens is that it changes the distribution of these objects, and that you can keep clicking it till the cows come home, and you're never necessarily going to get the layout that you want. But I'm pretty sure I've done this so many times, and sometimes when you do this, it's probably better to just press the C key, make it editable, and then you've got all of those objects, and you can just position them by hand, and then you can get them exactly where you want. The problem with that kind of thing is that you lose the procedural nature of MoGraph. You lose it's not so easy to add a new one in, or use any of your effectors and things like that. But actually, there is a little trick that you can do which will allow you to kind of have total control over placement. What you can do is you can use single polygon objects like I have here, and you just put them into a connect object, and then you clone onto the connect object. And you just clone onto that, and you use the polygon center, And it means you can move those polygons around wherever you want. You can constrain them to a surface if you want, and then your objects wherever you like. You can rotate them for orientation. If you need more beer, you just add more polygons. I wish it was that easy. So in a way, it's the best of both worlds. You have the procedural nature of MoGraph, but you have the control of the artist, the human, deciding the creative decisions, because computers really don't have a great sense of aesthetic. We really do have to tell them what to do. So I wanted to talk about a recent project that I did, and talking about putting trees or beer across landscapes. And this was a job that I worked on recently with Resolution Design. They're a production company, a studio in Sydney. They do amazing work, and this was for Penfolds Wines. And they wanted to produce these maps or these terrains which show the different regions in South Australia, where they grow their wines, the different vineyards. So this is the Barossa region, and this is Adelaide Hills. And we needed to make sure that the terrain itself was really accurate, because they were going to use this around the world as part of a toolkit that Resolution were making for them, so that when they did their masterclass wine to all the wine geeks around the world, then they could show them exactly where the vineyards were. So we had to be pinpoint accurate with actually down to the fields that the vineyards were located in, which was a bit of a daunting task, but they wanted it also to look like an architect's model to a certain extent. Not necessarily realistic, so it had a certain stylisation to it. It was a fun job, and I thought, this is going to be great. One of the things that they stipulated was that they wanted to have this sort of terracing, the slicing effect, and you can see it a little bit in the hills and at the back where you have that stair-step effect in the terrain. So that was the first thing I thought that I would kind of try and tackle. I had no idea what I was doing here. I'm sorry. Yeah, so the first thing I thought was I'd slice this up, and I found this tutorial by Simon Fiedler, and yeah, I do tutorials too. And it was how to create this asset in Houdini, and I thought, okay, so I did that, and I followed it along, and then I thought, okay, I'll try this out in cinema. I brought the Houdini asset in, dropped it in a landscape. I thought, yeah, this is awesome, it's working perfectly. This is going to be a walk in the park. Easy. Nice procedural approach. Next thing I needed to do was to get the terrain, so for that I used DemEarth. And DemEarth is a plugin that you can buy at Hello Luxx. And it's a really awesome plugin for cinema. It downloads digital elevation model data from servers, and you can pinpoint, you can go to Google Maps and you can get the coordinates, you come in there, paste it in, and it will load the data and it will load the terrain. It also allows you to load in images from Google Maps, from Bing, OpenStreetMaps, and you can overlay the terrain, etc. on there. So if you're doing any kind of map work, it's really, really good. At this point, I'm thinking, all right, cool, that's McLaren Vale, by the way. And so far, we're 100% procedural. Feeling pretty damn good about this so far. So I thought, okay, I'll try out the asset. How much detail do I need? And that's one of the nice things with keeping it procedural like this. With DemEarth, you can easily zoom in and out. You can change the resolution of the mesh, the subdivision. So at this point, I'm still full of optimism. So I bring it in, drop it into my Houdini asset, and then I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, it didn't work very well. It was a total mess. The mesh was a mess. Took ages to generate. It was really slow. I tried to tidy it up, deleting polygons going, and realised it was a battle that I didn't really want to have. And you can see that we've got slices missing, polygons overlapping. And one of the other things as well about this, that you've got all these really annoying little tiny bits. And like, it's so fussy, all this funny wobbly, but it's just too fussy. And we wanted something really more stylized, more beautiful. We didn't want to have to worry about that kind of detail. Of course, we didn't want all these stupid polygons doing that either. So I decided to just go back to the original mesh. I then made this terrain, the outline of the area, took them, booleaned them together, ended up with, this was the mesh we ended up with. I was thinking, it's a little bit too detailed and fussy at the bottom. I quite like the detail on the hills. I want the hills to be like that, but I don't want all that fuss there. You can see it there. So what I did was I used a smoothing deformer. Smoothing deformer is pretty cool, and it allows you to obviously smooth your mesh, but I wanted to keep the detail in the hills, so I painted this vertex map nice and quickly. You can drop that in, and that allows you to smooth out your mesh wherever the vertex weight is at 100. So that was a nice approach. So I did that, and I grabbed my cloner, and I thought, okay, I'll make 40 slices. So I put a plane object in, created 40 planes, and then put them in a Boolean, and then I was like, it's not going to work. So I decided to try and break it down into like smaller sections. So I got like just 10 planes at a time trying to do it like that. Still didn't work. I don't think it was a problem with Houdini in the first place. I don't think this was a problem necessarily with Cinema. I think it was mostly down to user error. Just trying to be too optimistic with these million-point objects, and there's just not enough memory on the machine. And in the end, what I decided to do was to do it manually. So I kind of created each plane, and then I Booleaned it out the terrain. It was only 40 slices, it didn't take that long, and then ended up with this. I was like, oh my God, it's still a disaster. At first glance, you think it's working okay, but I've got all this bloody horrible mesh, all these triangles, and too fussy. But at this point, I'm like, I'm not giving up. So I persevered. And if you go into the Attribute Manager modeling settings, it's got this mesh check thing. It allows you to select boundary edges, which is pretty handy. And if we look, I think we've got about 840,000 points on this model at this point. I'm thinking, this is going to be fun, cleaning this up. So I used the boundary edges, and then you can run it edge to spline, and it ended up with all these splines. So I made the B splines, and then I went through and deleted loads of points by hand, down to about 300,000 odd. I didn't just do it all manually. I used a script as well, Procedural Approach. And the script is really simple. It just goes through point objects, it selects every other point and then you can delete them. But the problem with that is the result is not exactly perfect. The computer has no sense of aesthetic. It just arbitrarily deletes the points that you tell it to. And if you've got a small island that only has a few points, then it totally destroys the shape of it. So you run this script, and then you go through and delete your points, and then you end up with destroying half your model. And because you're using B-splines as well, the corners all go soft. So it was still quite a lot of manual process. I'm thinking, oh my God, I've got loads of these bloody maps to make. I can't be doing them all this way. So I thought, right, I'm going to step back and think of another way to do it. So I came back to my mesh again. I'm getting a bit tired by now. It's been a few days. But R18 was in beta, and I'm beta testing it for Maxon. And I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll use the Voronoi Fracture. It's like perfect for this. And Voronoi Fracture allows you to like fracture objects. It's pretty much going to be, everyone's going to be making exploding things. I added in a matrix object and put it in linear mode, running through, and I thought I did that so that I could create all the slices. And then if you drop the mesh into a Voronoi Fracture, you get this, these funny shapes. Obviously, that's not the result I want. That's the default point distribution. So you just remove that and drop the matrix object in there, and then boom, you get this result. I was like, okay, this is cool. This is cool. So that was quite quick. It actually calculates it really quick. They did a good job of it, and it easily allows me to change the number of slices, the thickness of the slice, just by adjusting the matrix object. So now I've found this procedural approach that's actually going to work, and it's really quick. The other nice thing is you get this beautiful color display, and although it's pretty garish, it really does show you the shape that you're going to get from your slices, which was really nice. The problem is that, unfortunately, the Voronoi Fracture doesn't create the stair-stepping effect. It just creates the slices, so I still had to do a little bit more work. But luckily, the Voronoi Fracture has this thing that has these selection tags built in, so you make that editable, and then you can select all the selection tags, and then you can do edge to spline, and then we're back to the splines, and then we can clean up the splines. But at least the first part of the process was really fairly procedural and quick and easy, and this was the method that I ended up using. So we needed to add roads, fields, and buildings. DemEarth includes this thing called Smart OSM, OpenStreetMaps. Downloaded that, I was like, oh no, roads. And if we look up close, the amount of detail that we have, far too much. So we decided we needed something more stylized, and we decided to draw them by hand. So we ended up with this, terrain. We ended up with some fields. And the fields, we just drew them all by hand. We needed to be accurate. We needed to know exactly where the vineyards were. And Fleur, my lovely wife, helped me out with this. And we just basically loaded in a Google satellite image and then sat there and draw all the splines one by one for days. And then project them down onto the mesh so they took on the the terrain nicely, and then we put hedges and fences around them, and then we added roads, and then we added foliage, and then we added buildings. And the buildings as well, tried using open street maps, but they were much too small. So the buildings are actually huge, massive buildings, but for this kind of map, it worked perfectly. And we ended up with this kind of result. This is the Barossa map. And we realised that after using the procedural approach, some elements handcrafted really is the only way to go. And this was the kind of result that we got. And you can see that it feels really natural and organic, especially tracing and drawing all the fields like that. I don't think any procedural approach would have really brought us so close to that, because obviously man made those fields, and you kind of get that natural feeling from it. And I think the point here is that with our work, we're striving to create a certain aesthetic. And if we compromise that artistically by using a procedural workflow, then sometimes really you just got to knuckle down, put the hours in. Because the thing is with computers, they're great at positioning and doing stuff and generating things, but really they're not that great at animating, I don't think. They can't animate, can they? This little guy here, he's animated procedurally using C-Motion in Cinema, which is a procedural animation tool for cyclic motion, like walk cycles. It works for a toy robot, but I don't think it would really work for character stuff. If you need character animation, you need a really talented human being. This is an example of a piece of work that I did about 8 years ago when I first came to Australia, and I was working freelancing at Numeric. And I think with animation, it's any type of animation, not just character animation, it's the same. Human intervention is essential. And this was ink dropped in water. Each drop was then masked, coloured and tracked into place by hand in After Effects. And you could probably do this using some kind of fluid sim and doing it that way in a procedural way, but I don't think you'd get the result any quicker. And I think using a real fluid gives you a much more natural, nicer feeling, and no particles were harmed making this. I'm almost done. This is a more recent promo that I did for Channel 11. They did a rebrand for The Simpsons, and I just put this one in there because it's almost the extreme opposite of the last one, because virtually everything in here is procedurally animated. There's no way that you really want to go in and animate all those sprinkles by hand. So we've got rigid bodies. The Simpsons is done with rigid bodies and hinges dropping down. Even the donuts are soft bodies, and they're driven by motors. But at the same time, you do kind of handcraft that procedural effect. You kind of create one thing and then you tweak it and then you add little elements and then maybe some wind, etc. So we're still, even with procedural, we're still working kind of handcrafted procedural, they hand in hand. Yeah, there you go. Nice quick promo. So both handcrafted and procedural processes, they work hand in hand. Don't compromise your artistic integrity. Use whatever gets the job done as fast as you can. I've noticed recently that manufacturers with software are making software with more and more of these features that we don't necessarily need, automating processes, or artists asking for feature X, Y, and Z. I need more automation? But when we say that, aren't we asking the computer to do the work for us? When I got to this point, I was thinking, you know, that's my last slide, by the way. I think I'm going too long. But at this point, I was thinking, oh, God, I've just got to come around, put my feet up. Oh, I'm going to put in my retinal controller and stare at the screen, and the computer's going to do the animation for me. And I think if we all stare at the screen hard enough, we can do it together. So just concentrate, and hopefully we can change the colour of this. Come on. It's going to happen. Ah. Oh, yeah, see, look at that. We did it. Now that is procedural animation at its best. Thank you, guys.
He's pretty good, isn't he, folks? And, you know, if you haven't been, go to Hello Luxx and check out all the amazing training. I know his training's helped me massively recently, especially the X-Particles ones. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Anyone got any questions for Tim?
With the vineyard splines, you said you projected them down onto the landscape. How did you do that?
Oh, it's just, there's actually a command, project. So you just select the splines in point mode, and then you can switch to your top view, make sure you don't have any other objects in place, and then just right-click project, and then project from that view. And then as soon as they hit a surface, then the point will stop. So if you had like a heart, and you needed to put veins on it, you could draw all your veins, and then you can just project it, and then the veins will follow around the surface.
So you projected from top down?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you draw those splines? In Illustrator?
No, I just did it directly. Because we had Dem Earth and we had the terrain, you can load the Google satellite image, so you can download different resolutions. So we downloaded, I think it was like 900, it downloads them in little slices, and then Dem Earth is awesome because it then like blends them all together into a massive seamless texture. So we did that at super high res, about 900 slices, and then we just did it directly in Cinema.
Right. So you were sort of tracing those exact
just like
farmyard shapes.
dot,
Wow.
dot, yeah.
You got patience, man.
Well, my wife did she did 2 of them on her own.
Good on you, Fleur.
Hey there. How do you possibly work out, like when you're trying to scope that to a client and you sort of don't know how many of those things you're going to have to go through, how do you possibly like give a value of days in terms of how long it's going to take? Because, you know, you thought it was all going fine, and then, you know, you had to keep going.
Yeah, well, the producer, Fleur at Luxx, is it always takes longer than you think. It's really hard. It's really hard because, you know, when you get a brief like that, they give you a whole bunch of style frames or, you know, mood board of different references and things like that. And you look at it, like I started off with, I thought, it's going to be a walk in the park with the slices. But actually it turned out, because of the density and the detail on the map, it was an absolute nightmare. So, you know, I probably went way over budget on that. I guess you just have to like think how long it's going to take you and almost double it to a certain extent. You know, even after 20 years of quoting, I still get it wrong quite often. And then the thing is that you never really realise all the technical problems you're going to encounter along the way, or like just bugs and stuff like that in software and things that are going to cause hiccups. And then, of course, clients change things that they don't realise, the repercussions of it. So, you know, we did have quite a few late nights on that. But I guess to answer the question, it's a matter of experience, really, and trying to break it down into the separate parts. And I always tend to do my quotes as like outline what the deliverables are and then milestones through the project. And as you write that out, it kind of clarifies in your head how long you think it's going to take, and then add more days onto how long you think it's going to take, because it will always takes longer than you think.
I'm guessing you run your business and you've been doing it for a long time. Do you get involved with every project, or do you have input at the tools level, or you kind of sometimes you just direct it?
No, always hands-on every project. We're really small, you know. There's only 2 full-time staff. We've just actually got a new guy, Dan Bragger, working for us, and he is interning with us a few days a week. But we've started the collective, so there's now about 8 or 9 of us all in. But I definitely do a lot of the work for all of the jobs. Yeah, well, I wouldn't really want it any other way. When I was in the UK for Hyper, we had about 8 or 9 staff, and then you tend to get a bit managerial and you oversee a lot of the jobs. But I really have to make sure that my finger's on the button.
Yep. Thanks very much, mate. That was great. I just wanted to know more about your schedule and how you work your day, because you've obviously got your tutorial site and everything like that, but you've also got client work and you've got a family. Yeah. What does your day look like, and how do you break it apart?
Well, like the last sort of 3 or 4 months have been a nightmare. About 3 days off. But generally, I get up, and sometimes I get up before everyone else and just do a little bit of work. It depends how late I work the night before. And then I skate to school with my kids, which is awesome. They go on their little scooters, and I ride a skateboard. And that gets me to the studio. Yeah, I don't have enough time these days to do the training side of things. I really wish I did. I've got quite a few projects bubbling in the background, but client work always tends to take over. Yeah, and then I always try and make time to come home and see the family and have dinner with them. And then depending on what the project is, I go back to work sometimes. So I have a studio at home as well that I work. So yeah, it's been a hard few months actually recently. It's a bit of a quieter week next week, thank goodness. But it's difficult to find the right work-life balance, for sure. But then we do the job and we do the creative work, and it is fun to do it. And although it's not always, very stressful sometimes. But at the end of it, it's nice and rewarding when you've, as a team, and you've produced a piece of work and the client's proud of it. So it kind of gives you a impetus to do it all over again. it's that old thing of when you start a job and you're like, this is awesome, I'm awesome, this is great. Oh shit, this is rubbish, I'm going to fail. This is good, I'm awesome, this is brilliant. You know. But yeah, it's a tricky one to do, for sure.
Hey, I'm really interested in the collective, what your reasoning was for doing that and what that looks like for the three businesses working there.
Yeah, okay. That's a good question. I think the reason for it, from my perspective, is that like I turn loads of work away because I'm just always too busy, and it's just such a shame to turn work away. When I was in the UK, we had quite a lot of full-time staff, and then when we had some bad times, we had to let people go, which was really awful because they were friends, but for not financial reasons, we had to do that. And I never really want to go down that route again, where I've got lots of staff, or that's not lots, but it's enough for it to, you're playing with people's lives. And the collective was a way of bringing a lot of different skill sets together. So Baxter Studios, who are there, they're an ex-Ogilvy art director and copywriter, so they're really branding oriented, whereas Mike and Alex, who are Never Sit Still, they do some 3D, but they really excel in 2D stuff, like a lot of After Effects animation and things. And then obviously Luxx is more 3D oriented. So from that perspective, it kind of brings a lot of skill sets together. And we all run our own independent businesses still, and then we share projects, which is a really nice way of doing it without having to bring employees into my company and then me be responsible for them all the time. And at the same time, we have like a nice broad skill set, and we tend to just bring in freelancers that we need for specific roles. So if we need some modelling done, for instance, and we can't buy the model, then we'll outsource that to someone who just excels at modelling. If we need storyboarding or that kind of thing done, or art direction, then maybe we get someone in specifically for that role. And I think that not only does that not make the business so risky, it also means that you bring in talent that is perfect for the role, rather than having a whole bunch of generalists and everyone trying to do everything. You need someone who just does fluids. That's all they do, 24/7. You bring them in, and then you're not guaranteed, but you're more likely to get the better result for it. So I think as a collective, it allows that sort of level of freedom. So that's why.
Hello, I noticed that you love Cinema 4D. I'm only new to Cinema 4D, and I'm mostly 3ds Max and Maya. What renderer do you use? Because I'm used to V-Ray and Mental Ray, but at my work they use Octane, and obviously the initial renderer in Cinema 4D, but what do you use?
Well, I tend to use either the physical render in Cinema, or I've got V-Ray 3, which is not on public release yet, but it's been in beta for so long. I bought it about a year ago, and they went on the beta for it, and it's awesome. The problem is with V-Ray and Cinema is that the Chaos group were a bit slow with their giving out the SDK to the programmers, so the release of it has been really delayed. So Cinema is much more further behind as far as V-Ray in comparison with like Maya and 3D Studio Max and stuff like that. But the V-Ray 3 for Cinema actually rocks. It's got like an instant preview render, just like Arnold and Octane. It's CPU. It works with CUDA. It works with OpenCL. So V-Ray generally, but it's a little bit buggy because it's in beta. So when we did the Make It thing, for instance, like compositing tags didn't work, which was a real bind that we had to work around. Other than that, I just really use this the physical renderer, although I'm thinking of looking at Redshift, which looks pretty rad as well. I mean, the thing is that there's so many renderers out there now, it's a bit of a minefield of what to use. The Cinema physical renderer is really powerful. It's a really nice renderer. It's just a bit slow. Like we did the Make It thing, we did the original style frames with the physical renderer and the beautiful like GI. But like when we did it with V-Ray, it was about 10 times faster, so we did it with V-Ray.
Okay, let's give Tim another round of applause. Mate,